Hello, Holly. How are you?
Hi, good evening. How are you?
I am great. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. So so why don't you let people know who you are, what you do, and your background?
Absolutely. Well, hello, everyone, who everyone's tuning in or sees this later. My name is Holly Vingson-Ruiz, and I'm a grief consultant, certified death doula at Grief Help Near Me, LLC.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, what is a grief doula? I've heard of the term doula for birthing. What exactly is a grief doula?
So, I am a death doula. So, I do work a lot within the community, but I tell a lot of people I work from womb to tomb. So, a lot of people have heard the doula term in the sense of being a midwife, birthing, coaching doula to bring life into the world, as in bringing a child into the world with a mother. However, a death doula helps with the transition and does way more support, resourcing, and helping the family through the guiding of someone in their family that's possibly transitioning out.
Okay. And in terms of the work that you do, what was your motivation for getting into this work?
So I became a part of this world, in this realm. For me, it happened in November of 2018. Prior to that, I had gone through a miscarriage that I really didn't understand that grief. And I had lost a child, and then I got to experience having an amazing, beautiful baby boy. And he aged to be 6 years and 11 months. And unfortunately, he was in a tragic drowning accident at a birthday party. And unfortunately, after all of this had changed our lives, me and my husband, 6 months after, he unfortunately passed away and is now with our children in heaven. So now I'm the only one left of our family, and I honor them by helping others, by filling their cups, by getting them back on their feet. Because I remember when I fell down, everybody was great and quick to hug and love and be surrounding me. But when it was time to get back into normalcy, or the new version of me after grief, there was no one around to understand what I was experiencing. And that was a really hard time for me. So I always tell people it's not the fall you have to worry about, it's the bounce back from coming back from any situation, is really where you see who your friends are and who's going to be around and who isn't.
Mm, okay. Well, can you can you tell us what is the clinical definition of grief and how grief typically manifests in people?
So, grief, a lot of people, when they think grief, the first thing they think is a person's death, right?
Mm.
Let me ask you a question, Fred. Do you think, when you think grief, do you think of a person losing another person or losing someone?
Yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind.
And that's majority of what a lot of people think. However, there's so many different forms of grief that a lot of people don't talk about or don't even know about. The clinical
Mm,
definition of grief is the emotional response to loss. And that could be loss of a job, loss of a house, loss for a transition of a relationship, losing a marriage, getting a divorce. These are all losses. And people, there's even, again, we're talking today about grief and loss with losing a job or possibly being terminated or fired, because here in Florida we are an at-will state, so that does very much
mm,
can change for us here versus laid off. So when we talk about grief, a lot of this is a disenfranchised grief, meaning that this isn't spoken or supported about more in the community, and this is an uncomfortable conversation that a lot of people don't know how to have.
mm. So how would a non-clinical person, because obviously you're educated and this is your realm, so to speak, how would a non-clinical person know someone is dealing with grief per se?
I love this question because we have circles of friends, right? We all connect with people. We all know, let's say you know your family members and you know when they're off, right? You notice, like, let's
Mhm,
say they're not sleeping well and you can tell how their response is from not sleeping well, right? Just general, because you've been
mm,
around them so much, you know. So, say all of a sudden certain things are changing, like you're noticing some people are acting different than what their usual normal response is. A lot of people don't notice it because we're sometimes so caught up in ourselves, we're not paying attention to our outside environment. However, if you really pay attention, there's very much significant signs. It could be anxiety, it could be nervousness, it could be shaking, it could be lack of sleep, it could be irritability when that person's been nothing but joyful and amazing and pleasant, and then has completely gone downhill and is like, I don't like work and I don't want to do this and I'm not paid
Mm,
enough for this. These are real things. When people change, the group, when their grief changes them, and if they don't talk about it, we internalize it. And in that case, and when we internalize it, it's not healthy, because when you're just keep and pushing and pushing and pushing down, what happens? Eventually it's got to come out, and we don't want it to come out on the wrong person.
mm, okay, gotcha. Um, is it expected when someone is grieving a job loss or termination? Is it similar to grieving a loved one, or someone that's passed away?
So no, it isn't. It's different. These are two different things.
Mm,
So I like to look at it like this. We have when we have a loss of a person, right? I know that I lost my whole family. I can tell you that my emotional response is the loss to my family members, right? Grief with work, when you lose your job, you can't tangibly connect your grief to a job because that job's no longer there for you, correct?
mhm,
So when you're going through job loss, the routine that you had going to your 9 to 5 or your 8 to 4 or whatever your timing or your schedule regimen and routine that you have known for X amount of time, all of a sudden is gone. Change just happened. And change is, I always tell people, change is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And that's our goal, is to help these people with mental health that
mm,
struggle when they lose a job. People panic. They're like, what am I going to do with my bills? What am I going to do with my house? What about my kids? What about diapers? What about food? People
mm,
go into a pure grief mode that we don't see because they hide behind. We all hide in our own ways. We all cope in our own ways. But when we don't talk about it, that's when it gets really, really bad.
mm. Would you mind saying something that you said before? I think you said something very profound. You said change is inevitable,
Change,
but can you
mhm,
repeat that?
absolutely. I tell a lot of my
Mm,
clients, change is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And I know that for me, when my life changed in many ways, because I've actually been laid off from a job, and that changed my life. I was hurt. I was sad. I was angry. I was feeling many emotions and confused and didn't understand what just happened and why was I fired. You get questions of why me, and then you think of bargaining. You want to bargain back for your job because you don't want to lose
mm,
your bill monies and all these different forms of funding. So we try all these different ways. The same way we deal with grief in different forms, I tell everyone, grief is like a fingerprint. We all have it, but we all experience it differently.
mm. Okay. It's it's interesting because from the HR standpoint, I've been doing HR for 25 years, and unfortunately, I've laid off and terminated maybe hundreds of people. And in terms of the stage of grief, that I see the most is anger. And that anger manifests in many different ways. It manifests in employees wanting to talk to other employees and just say negative things about the employer. I've been cursed at, I've been yelled at. Terminating someone is not a pleasant thing. It's something that has to happen in terms of a job, but it's not anything that any HR person that has a moral compass says, "Oh, I'm dying to do this today." It's a horrible thing to terminate someone, even when they've done something to warrant their termination. So from the HR standpoint, I think anger I've seen the most, and I've seen anger have very negative effects on people's careers.
And
So,
that's amazing. And that's very important you bring that up, because it's not they're cursing at you and they're angry at you, but they're not really angry at you. They're angry at the action you had to do. You are doing an uncomfortable conversation on that side. I'm doing an uncomfortable
mhm,
conversation on this side. And that's one thing a lot of people don't understand. There are uncomfortable conversations, and some people like you and I are meant to do these kind of things. It's not an action, it's not us, and then we don't want people to take it personally. It's something that was had to be done in an action form due to whatever the reason. So it's those kind of moments where you will see anger, you will see all these things, but I do believe on your side is it's very hard to say don't take it personal because you're doing an action and you're you're kind of basically, you know, hanging the sword, call it a day.
Mhm.
And they're in their mind, you are the enemy. You are, how dare you? You just stopped my funding. You stopped everything. So they're basically grief throwing up at you because they're going through a immense amount of pain because they're full of questions and thoughts of unanswered uncertainty. And when we panic, what do? We go off on wrong people. We say things that we don't mean, and we say things that are not appropriate. I've seen it. I've seen it in good. I've seen it in bad, and you see even in an ugly when you're losing a job. Like I can say I've never cursed out an employee, but and one thing too, like you did mention with employees talking to other employees, something to keep in mind is that if you're laid off from a job and for whatever the reason, if that person is needing to grieve from that job, I don't think it's good for them to stay in contact with coworkers and employees from the
Mm.
previous job because that might hurt them better than helping them. But sometimes let's say you've met a person, you hang out with them outside of your workplace, you talk to them outside of work, and you discuss more than just business. Then that's different. That's a different form of a grief because you're going to still lose a coworker friendship, but you can still
Mhm.
maintain that relationship if you put the work in. It comes down to also if people want to put the effort to keep that relationship after losing a job from the previous place. You know, if you, because then the person's going to be like, oh my gosh, hear about this drama that's still happening at the job. Why would that person want to hear that when they're no longer there? That's going to hurt them rather than help them. You know, even if it
Mm.
wasn't their reasoning for leaving or it wasn't their wanting to leave, it's good sometimes to be in a position to connect with your coworkers if you're more in a personal outside the workplace. But if you're not, it's not healthy, I feel, and I've seen clients that have said to me that it's better to not be in connect with my last previous employers and coworkers than it is now. So I've seen a lot of
Mm.
different variations of that.
Do you subscribe to the 5 stages of grief? Are there 5 or 6? Because I've read different things.
So it was originally five, and I saw the sixth
Okay.
one, which is like, yeah, is fawning, fawning or flighting, which is like basically flight or fight form, and you're
Mhm.
experiencing a lot of adrenaline. I call it almost like the grief
Mm.
rush. That's what I call it. And a lot of people don't know that grief comes with highs and lows. Like you will have amazing days, but like every other, and there's some days you'll have bad days, but how you choose to look at it, and this is very important, I believe, for me, is if you change the way you look at things you look at start to change. So let's say you're out of a job and now you're worried about bills. A lot of people
Mm.
don't know about a career source or these resources to help you find jobs, to get employed, or to go out and find free resources to help you cover just for the month while you're obtaining a job. There are so many resources that people don't know about, and that's what I do in my job is I resource you right. That is my goal because I don't want to just give you all these tools for your mental toolbox because I consider myself like a Home Depot but for your mental health. And I always tell people I give you tools to
A Home
better.
Depot for your mental health. I love that.
Yes, a Home Depot for Halls, the Home Depot. Yes. So I love being able to give tools to people. And even if you don't use it right now, I know that later on you'll be like, "Oh, I have this tool. I can use it." And you can use it when you're dealing with grief. Let's say we're ever in a position where we lose our jobs, God forbid. But in that sense, you would be like, instead of being like, woe is me and freaking out and anger and sadness and bargaining and depression and all these feelings, you're making plans, you're making actions, you're putting plans in place. There's a process. There is putting a plan in place is so important just to get back on your feet because you've fallen down, but now it's time to stand up because when you hit rock bottom, what's the only thing you can do? Go up.
Mhm. Exactly. Exactly. There's a word that you brought up a couple times, bargaining. And I want to make the correlation to the world of HR because I've been on the situation on the other side of the table where sometimes you will have employees that will, bargain for their jobs. Now, I do know of some circumstances in which it has worked, That's maybe 1% of the time. During a termination, someone is able to plead their case and state that they did not get the appropriate communication or training for their job. And maybe 1% of the time, it has, allowed them to keep their job
Succeeded.
longer.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But typically, bargaining doesn't really work in the world of like terminations and layoffs because these are pretty set, and typically there's no turning back from that. There's no turning back. Um, so for someone who, like for example, I mentioned during the opening, I mean, Boeing's laid off, or they're about to lay off thousands of employees. Dell, Cisco, a bunch of other corporations, and I'm not even speaking about small businesses as well. I mean, they're going through their own downturn right now. So, for someone who is, just been laid off, and let's say they've received outplacement services that's helping them with their resume, with a career coach, what should someone do now for their mental health after they've received that quote unquote pink slip?
So, this form of grief, if you do not know, it is categorized as disenfranchised grief, meaning that it's not something that is talked about so much. It's almost similar to like
Mm,
pet loss, right? Pet loss,
mm,
our pets are our loved ones. But think about it. How many pet loss support groups do you know about? Or how many people talk about
mm,
pet loss in general? Not many. So it's kind of very similar to that. And so when it comes down to you put all your other tool, you put all your other plans in place and you're going through the process. I always tell people talking about it, finding somebody who works for you, because you need to find somebody who's going to understand you, that's going to get it. And you don't want them to get it, but you kind of want them to understand you, to be on that same balance and wavelength of how do I move forward with this? Because that's an important question we're all asking ourselves. How do we move forward with this? Whatever, with this being whatever it is, grief, loss of a job grief, person grief, pet loss grief, knowing that you might you have terminal illness grief, that's a
mm,
anticipatory grief. Let's say the other one I thought about was when you said, let's think of servers, our bartenders here in Florida. We have an amazing tourist season, but I believe that they probably get laid off on seasons off, right? And in that time, you think about, that's an anticipatory grief because they're anticipating to that day when they're going to be like, hey, you got to go because we don't have that many more shifts for you. That's a panic. Like people would go into like,
mhm,
what? Where's my money? But I was making every week I was coming home with this amount, and now I'm down to $500 a week. That's not gonna cover my bills and all these things. That's an anticipatory grief because they kind of knew, but they were still going through the process of, oh, I'm still just gonna wait it out. I'm gonna wait it out. I'm gonna do my job, and they're gonna keep me.
mm,
A lot of people think, even on a temporary job, that they're gonna be kept, and that's not always the case. Staffing positions, especially. Think about, let's talk about a staffing position. You go there, you are meant to be a temporary position until deemed otherwise. Sometimes they'll keep you there for 6 months, they could keep you there for 3, maybe a year, but eventually, that if they don't need that position, they will terminate the position, meaning your fundings are now changed. So then they got to find you a new job. And then that's another grief. That's another different form of grief. So you're feeling all these emotions just from loss itself. We're not even talking about loss of a person, just loss.
mm,
So that's a hard feeling to really just relish, like when we grieve, we all grieve so different and we don't know how to talk to each other. And I feel like you have to have a safe place to be like, "Hey, are you doing okay? Are you all right? Is there anything I can do to help?" Because a lot of people can say, "I'm here for you." And then when we call you and you don't answer, that doesn't really make sense. That doesn't sound like you were there for me. That's just my thought process. So I look at it that same way. When you need people in your corner, that's important. You have to have support. And once you have your plans in place, like you said, coming back to that understanding that what do we do for our mental health? Speak to a professional that works with you. There's free mental health services that a lot of people don't even know. And if you're in a different city or state, you can look at your local resources and see there's people that are willing to help you for free. And that's amazing. kudos to everyone who can do that. And so we all are just trying to better by talking and breaking that barrier of stigma with mental health. We want to talk uncomfortable to get uncomfortable, or speak uncomfortable to get comfortable. And it's one conversation at a time.
Mm, mm. There was something you mentioned before about coworkers and staying in contact with coworkers. Do you think that could, I mean, it seems like it might be a positive thing. It also might be a negative thing. When do you think people should stay in contact with their coworkers and under what circumstances?
So for me, for my experiences and majority of my jobs, I have not kept in contact with my managerial position people that were in my that
Mm,
were above me. It's just I felt that it wasn't going to help me by going further here in our, they do verification of employment, and they can only say you work from this time to this time, and they can't say personal opinions or statements, which, is important. However, when you have a coworker, let's say they get laid off because and they start disrespecting about the company, that's going to cause a problem to the current employee, because then that current employee will probably be like, well, I want to leave too, or I want to leave,
mm,
and you're losing two employees versus one. So you don't want, there's those moments where if you're connected outside the job, and again we come back to how friendly are you, or how really connected are you with your coworkers. If it's just
mm,
business, then there's no need to better keep moving forward with something that you're not a part of any longer. That's like going to your high school and you already graduated. You know what I mean? Like you've already been there, you've already experienced, now you have to move forward. And you can't always, and I've even with grief, you can't always bring everything from the past with you. And sometimes that
mm,
means that you have to get rid of the things that are going to hurt you. And if that might be one, and if it's coworkers that are talking bad in your ear and saying, well, the boss is saying this about you, that's not going to help your mental health. If you hear that your coworker saying, your ex-boss is saying this and this about you, you're going to feel upset. You're going to be like betrayed. How dare they talk about me and I'm not there to defend myself? Mental health starts very much for changing, reconstructing, trying to figure out, okay, what do we do here? And that can either help that person or hurt them. And that's why I always think, for at least for me and in my experience, I believe that if you're not with them as a friend, or you don't connect with them outside of a friendship realm, and it's just business, leave it as that and move forward with your own grief and work to a better career that's going to better benefit you and your family.
mm, mm. Allowing yourself to be vulnerable is one of the toughest things that anyone can ever do, right? It's something that there are TED Talks about being vulnerable and YouTube videos. So, let's say I am one of your clients, and I'm telling you that I want to share my grief of my job loss with a close family member, but this person doesn't have the best track record of being comforting and being supportive. What what would you tell me, and or would you encourage me to not talk to this person or do it in a certain way? Like, what would be your recommendation?
So we're going to do a mock moment, okay?
Mhm.
So I'm so sorry that you lost your job, Fred. I'm so sorry about what you're experiencing right now. Do you feel that if you talk to this person and tell them about your job loss, will this help you or will this hurt you?
I don't know. I'm
That's an honest
unsure.
question, right? So
That is.
in those moments, that's where you have that's the client right there, is the client's honest choice to make the decision, will this help me or will this hurt me? Those are the most important things, because our mental health is like a, you have to nurture it, you got to love it. And if you tell somebody, let's say the track record, okay, so you didn't tell, let's say you told me just the track record, all right, we're going to go back to the mock.
Mhm.
So Fred, this person with this not great, loving, compassionate side, if you tell them, will this better benefit your relationship with them, or will that hurt your relationship? Will they say anything negative to you, or will they say positive things? It comes down to understanding what is best for you. We have to customize your tools. We have to sharpen your knives. We have to sharpen your set and really hone in on your skills, because this is where I would tell you, this is where you can tell them. And I think it's great. I'm fully supportive of you telling someone whether or not they don't like it. You can't control their actions. You can only
Mm,
control your actions. So if they respond negatively, you can say, I'm sorry you feel that way, and proceed on, or put your boundaries and have boundaries and standards. That's what we discussed. Those are much more tools I get involved and really honed in on, and really just my goal is to sharpen your skill set, to make you better and learn to be understanding assertiveness, not to be aggressive. You don't have to be aggressive. It's assertiveness, being able to defend yourself, boundaries and standards, being able to talk to family, even in a sad situation like this, losing a job, because loved ones will be like, what are we going to do? What about the money? You're the only one providing, or those kind of things. Those questions come out, and it gets in our mind, the person
mm,
who's going through the mental health, like, okay, I'm already dealing with what's in my head, and now you're throwing extra more thought processes in my head. That's going to get me overwhelmed. So that can cause a lot of I call it a grief ball. That grief ball can get really big and overwhelming. But if you give, let's say you're going to share the grief ball with me, I can help you make that grief ball just a little bit more tangible, a little bit more softer and smoother to hand to you, versus something that's going to be so much to be overwhelmed that that conversation is not going to be useful or critical for your mental health.
mm. Okay. A couple more questions because I know we're running out of time. But if you wanted, someone who's going through a layoff now or termination to take away only one thing from this conversation, what do you want them to walk away with and put in place now?
Tough times don't last. Tough people do. And
Mm,
everybody in this world are tough people. And everyone will strive to do better. My goal is wanting you to go from surviving to thriving.
excellent. Excellent. And if people want to reach out to you, how can they find you?
So you can contact me at griefhelpnearme@gmail.com, or you can actually get in contact with Fred or anyone, like my information he has, or you guys can find me at Grief Help Near Me on Facebook or Instagram, and LinkedIn is my name. So I am so thankful, Fred, for you allowing me to be on here with you today. This was amazing. I enjoyed it. This is awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. God bless you, and we'll be in touch. We'll talk.
Yes. Have a great night. Thank you again.
Okay. Take care. Bye bye.